Today, I would like to start with a review. And we're going to just kind of go back through a few things we've talked about. First of all, we took our little walkthrough of the studio and we talked about the patch bay, which is the central hub of the entire studio. This is where all the equipment's plugged in, and this is where all the routing is done. In our DAW, we don't have that, right? Everything is done digitally, behind the scenes. It's all in one application. We started talking about routing a little bit, and today we're also going to go through two new types of tracks, right? So we've had our instrument track, and we talked about where tracks came from, and tracks came from a 24 track. Well, actually, they started from a mono machine, a one track machine, and they went to a 24 track tape machine for an analog tape. And that's where we get the term tracks, right? And the way that the tape machine worked, we talked about, it has these magnetic transducers that take the electrical signal coming in from a microphone and they magnetize tape with it. And there are in these tape heads, there are slots that all the way across the tape, there would be 24 basically lines of magnetism. So this tape is drug across here, and the magnetic changes are what we record onto magnetic tape. So we talked about tracks. We talked about channels, right? So in the DAW, the channel and the track are pretty similar, right? Because a channel has an input, and it comes down a channel strip. You have a mic gain, right? You have an EQ. You have a monitor section. And then you have these things called effect sends, right? Another term for these is aux sends or auxiliary sends. So these aux sends have their own bus. And we talked about buses too. If you imagine a big metal bar going all the way the length of this console, that would be one bus. Now this console has probably, 40 buses in it. So these buses are used to combine signals and send somewhere. So if you had two bass drum mics on these two channels, you could combine them and record them into one track. So that's channels, right? And that's busing. So an aux send would be an effect send. So if you have a guitar coming in one of your channels and you want to send that guitar to a reverb, you would turn up the effects knob, right? You would send from that channel to a reverb. It's not changing what you're doing with your mix down here for what you're monitoring, but it's an additional feed from one of these knobs that goes into a reverb unit so you can add reverb or delay to a guitar. And then as we come down, you can see we have a pan and we have an output section. This is just where it routes to. There's six, on this particular diagram, there's 6 sets of outputs, 6 or 2 or 3 stereos. And this could be for left and right, and this could be for surround sound, and it could be for a center channel and a sub is one example of how you would use these 6 if you were mixing in surround sound with 6 speakers. So we talked about audio signal flow, and we talked about how the microphone needs to go into a mic pre, right? And this mic pre boosts the level. So it's up to a level that we can print to tape. The mic pre is actually built into this console. And so the mic pre comes in and it goes down to the master output, and then it goes to tape. This is our audio signal flow. So we talked about guitar signal flow, where you strike a string, the string vibrates, a magnetic transducer picks it up, it changes the vibrations into an electronic signal. There's actually 2 of these transducers called pickups. And these pickups, they have a switch here, so you can switch between the different pickups. You can either use a combination of, or you can use one at a time. And then the signal goes into the guitar electronics, where you can change the tone and adjust the volume. And then it comes out this jack, goes into all your super cool pedals, right? These make you very hip. And after it goes through all these pedals, it goes into a preamp. And the preamp is used to bring the signal up enough to reach the amplifier. And then the amplifier outputs the signal to the speaker, which takes the electronic signal and it pushes a speaker cone, which turns into audio. Right? We talked about our DAW signal flow. We're going to be getting into this. We're going to be getting into audio next. So this is important. This is your very, very simple setup, right? This is just a microphone, an interface, and a computer. And the way this works is you have a source singing into a microphone, and the microphone goes into a mic pre, right? A mic preamp. And then from there, there's a USB cable that connects to your computer and goes into your DAW. So this step here, it has an A to D conversion. So before it can get to your computer, it has to go from this analog signal to a digital signal. And it's converted. It goes into your DAW. When you play back from your DAW, the digital signal is converted back to analog. So this is a bi-directional cable, this USB cable. And then your signal is going to come out of your headphone jack and your speaker outputs. And this knob adjusts the level. So that's DAW signal flow. So we talked about MIDI signal flow and MIDI cables, right? So MIDI cables are a 5-pin cable. And I have this little thing here. So this is a MIDI interface. And before all of the keyboards had USB on them, we used to use this to change the MIDI signal into a USB signal, right? And this actually has two sets of outputs on it. So we have 2 MIDI outs and 2 MIDI ins. And the way that MIDI works is it sends out a signal from one keyboard, and it's a digital signal that's only sending control information. And so the MIDI out of one keyboard goes into the MIDI in of another keyboard. This is the old way we used to make sounds. We would have a bunch of keyboards, we would route them all together, and we would make sounds this way. So we have our MIDI out that goes into the MIDI in of a keyboard. And that's 2 keyboards playing back at the same time. So the MIDI out is really the keyboard part. And the MIDI in is really only affecting the sound part. The MIDI in doesn't have anything to do with this second keyboard here. So in order to get this keyboard to a third keyboard, there's something called MIDI through. And that's exactly what it is. It's a pass-through. So whatever's coming in the MIDI in is undisturbed and put out the MIDI through. And that way you can have the MIDI through go into another MIDI in. I know this is a lot of ins, outs, and throughs here, and it's important that you understand how this stuff routes, right? If you have any questions about this, let me know. I'm just kind of skimming back through this stuff so I can refresh your memory some. We talked about the 3 parameters of a MIDI note. There's the pitch, how high and low it is. There is the duration, how long the note lasts. And there's the velocity, how fast the key is struck, right? And that translates to volume with some synthesizers, and it translates to different types of tone also. So maybe if you hit a note softer, it makes a different tone than it makes when you hit it louder. So far, we've been using instrument tracks only, right? And an instrument track, a Pro Tools instrument track, is actually a combination of 2 tracks. It's a combination of a MIDI track and an AUX track. Remember we talked about AUXs with the analog console just now, right? So this AUX track is the second half of an instrument track. So a MIDI track is a track that's used to record and play back MIDI data. That's all it does. It doesn't make any sound, doesn't do anything except record this data. Doesn't make any sound until it's routed somewhere to either a software instrument or a hardware instrument like an old school keyboard. And an aux track is a track that's used to route audio from one place to another. Okay? So let's take a look at this in Pro Tools. So here's this simple 2-track song that we were working on a couple of weeks ago, right? And we talked about the different parts of this interface. So we have our main section here where you can select the track, or you can solo and mute and record, right? And it also does automation. When we get into that, we'll talk about that later. And then this section of the track here is the MIDI section, right? So we have our MIDI section. We have our insert, which is where we put our, our plugins, our instruments. And then we have our audio section. So this part where we have an audio plug-in and an audio in and out is like an aux track or auxiliary track. And this section is like a MIDI track. So that's what I was talking about with a combination of both. So let me show you how this works. We're going to make a couple of new tracks. And I'm going to make an aux input track. Right? Aux input. And I'm going to create that. And I'm going to make a MIDI track. Right? So I'm making a MIDI track. So if we have a MIDI track here and I drag this information, this little melody here down to our MIDI track, now I have the MIDI information in a different place. It's no longer in our instrument track, right? So if I play this back, we won't hear anything because it's not routed anywhere. Okay, it's just MIDI in and out. There's no audio to it. There's no way for it to make any sound. In order to hear sound, I would have to insert our instrument, right? So I'd go up to instrument and I'll select Mini Grand. And now we have an aux track. And an aux track can be used for a lot of different things, right? It can be used for reverbs and delays. It can be anything that you need to route audio from one place to another is an aux track. But you don't record anything on it. It's only a routing device. So, in order to hear this piano and have the MIDI play into this piano, we have to route the MIDI to this piano. So if I look, my audio tracks have audio inputs and outputs here at the end. So if you had a microphone, you could plug it into an input, and your output is going to your speakers or your audio interface. So with the MIDI track, we need to route it the same way, that same type of signal flow, where if we were taking a MIDI cable, we would patch it from one keyboard to another. Now we're taking our MIDI data and we're patching it into this piano. So the way you do that is you route with the output section into our track. And you see it says AUX1, that's the name of the track, and MIDI Grand. So now if I play my piano, we have a complete chain. Right? Does everybody get that? You want me to go over it again? Is it clear? Right? So we have MIDI data. The MIDI data has to go somewhere because it's only data. In order to make sound, you have to have an instrument. Right? And so this instrument is on this aux track. Now we have an instrument track up here also, right? This is our piano where the melody came from. And this has already got MIDI and it's already got audio, right? And so what we could also do is we can take this MIDI track and we can route it to this MIDI instrument. So it doesn't have to be on the aux track. It can be on this instrument track also. So if you look at the MIDI output, you'll see that I have all of these selections here. And I can pick MIDI Grand. See the piano number 1, MIDI Grand. And now when I play the sound, it comes out our instrument track. Okay. Should I go over that again? Is everybody clear on that? About how auxes work? I know it'll get clearer as we go over it, all right? But I just wanted to show you what an instrument track actually was, okay? So let's get rid of this. And if you ever want to go back to where you started from, you can go to revert to saved. And that will take you back, because I don't need all those tracks that we made. Let's talk about one more use for an aux track. So say that I had this piano part and I wanted to add some reverb to it. What I would do is I would make a new aux track, stereo aux input track, and I'm going to create that. And then this track, I'll just name it reverb to avoid confusion. This track is now a routing channel just waiting for something to happen, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a effect on here. I'm going to choose a reverb. I'm going to use deverb because everybody has deverb. And I can take this piano track and I can send it into this reverb unit. There's a couple of different ways to do this. I mean, you can just, if you have your piano track and you wanted to hear reverb on your piano, you could just put a reverb plugin afterwards. And reverb, there we go. So I could put a deverb plugin right here. And then when I play this track, I'm going to hear reverb, right? And if you look at the signal flow, I've got MIDI going into a sound module, right? And so the MIDI is triggering the sound module. And then after the sound module is going to a reverb unit. Now that's way too much reverb, that's swimming. So you can adjust the reverb level with this wet dry knob. Okay, so that's how much reverb when you're using reverb on an instrument track itself. But this is not really a good habit to get into because what happens is if you had 100 tracks and you put a reverb on every track, then you are taking up a lot of your computer resources. So in order to minimize that, we'll get rid of this reverb. And we have a new column here that we haven't talked about. And this is our sends column. So you remember on the analog console, I said there were a couple of knobs that would send to reverbs. So that's exactly what this is. So if we come to the piano track and we go to our sends and we insert a bus across that send, right? So just pick bus 1 and 2 and I'll show you what it means. Right? So we talked about those big bus bars in the console, in the analog desk, that combine signals. That's exactly what this is, only it's digital. So we are taking the piano signal and we are duplicating it and we're sending it out our speaker, but by using this little aux send, we're also sending it somewhere else. And that somewhere else is going to be our reverb unit. Right? So when you add an aux send, you get this little fader that comes up, and this is how much of the piano you're sending to the reverb. So we'll just put it on for a second. And now we're going to come to our reverb track. right? So this is our AUX input track. And here we're going to select that same bus. So bus 1 and 2. So now we have a full chain. Signal coming in from MIDI into our piano. The signal is split and it's going to this bus. We adjust the volume with this slider. And you can hide this and show it just by clicking on it. If it's lit up, then you can see it. Right? And we can adjust our reverb level. So now if I play this melody, we have reverb or dry. Right? So this is the way you set up your effects whenever you're working with mixing in a DAW.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
So you said that this system is effectively the same as simply adding the effect to the input of the instrument track, except it's better in terms of computing power? Or did I misunderstand you?
It's not exactly the same because it's accomplishing the same goal. But the problem is that when you put an insert on an actual track, anything you have after that, if you say you had a reverb here and then you had a delay after it, it follows the signal chain. So it comes in with a piano sound, you add a reverb to it. Now the piano and the reverb are combined and they're going to a delay. So you don't have separate control. If you set up a separate aux send, right, like we'll do a delay one. Right, and so this is a delay plugin. So now I've got separate control. I can have, right? I got separate control over my reverb and my delay. If I put my delay here and I put my reverb here, I won't, my reverb will be hitting my delay. This way I can decide what I want it to do. So that's the subtle difference, right? And the way that you change your level when you're using this is with the mix knob, right? That's how much wet dry you have. When you have your reverb on an aux track, you always want it set to 100%. And you adjust your level with the amount of aux send that you send into the reverb. Questions? Anybody? Is everybody clear? Because it's a little bit more complicated than the routing that we've dealt with in the past, and I don't mind going over it again if anybody has any questions at all. Okay, so the next thing is, let's get rid of some of this stuff here. Let's talk about, actually this should have been bus 3 and 4 here. So another thing, when you're looking at these buses, so these buses can be used for a lot of different things. You can set the output of your piano track to be a bus, right? And you can route that bus wherever you want it to go, right? So you can set a bus for your output. And if you want to quickly, say I wanted to put this reverb across every instrument in my little mix here, right? So I'll turn it up, I don't know, -10, something like that. It's a decent amount of reverb, right? I'm going to get rid of this delay track for right now. And I'm going to name this bus 1 and 2 reverb. You can just right click on it and rename, and we'll call it reverb. So now I can visually see what this bus is sending to. So you can rename it there. You could also rename it here where it's coming into the reverb unit. Right? So anywhere that it's got the title, you can actually also rename it here in the I/O setup too. If you look at your buses and you scroll down, you'll see that I've renamed it Reverb. Now we'll go over this I/O setup some also. The main thing that you need to know about the I/O setup is when you go from system to system, sometimes things can get confused, right? And if you go to the bus tab and you just select default, it will put all of your settings to back where they should be for your interface, right? This is a routing window. This is where you make new buses. If you wanted to have 100 new buses, you can make 100 new buses. You can have as many buses as you want for your routing. But I just wanted to show you where you can name it. Now that you have a reverb here on this track, let's see, I'm going to put the reverb all the way at the end. Generally, we keep the effects at the end of the session. And I just drug it down. I just select the name, and you can drag tracks wherever you want. So let's say I want to put this reverb on every instrument. Here's my reverb send. I'll open these up a little bigger so we can see. Hide this editor. Right? So here's my reverb send, already set to -10. If I take this reverb and I option drag it, I can put it on another track. And it'll be exactly at the same level. So it's making a duplicate of the send at the level that you have it set. Right? So I'll go ahead and I'll just put reverb on everything for right now. I'm just going to option drag to every track. And I'm not going to put it on the bass track, okay? But so now I have reverb everywhere. Okay, you can change your mix for each instrument. This instrument could have more or less. This could have more or less. So this is, in essence, you're making a separate little mixer just for your reverbs.
I'm sorry, I have another quick question.
Sure.
So there's a volume slider for each one of the instrument tracks. I noticed also for the aux track, I can play with the volume there. So is that the volume that gets sent to the master from the aux track?
This aux track, you mean the reverb return here?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is what's being sent to your mix. So that's your overall level, and we have everything at 0 right now because we're not using this section. And generally, you can leave that set at 0. Right?
Is that different than the volume if I hit bus on the aux track?
You mean sending from here, from this area?
I mean, no. So on the aux track, if I click on the bus 1, 2, there's a volume slider there.
I'm not sure where you're talking about. Here? Which area are you talking about? I'm sorry. So I don't see. You mean?
Oh no. Okay, I see what happened. Okay, never mind then. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So the last thing I'm going to say about this reverb deal, and I'll go back over this later when we get into audio, is when you solo an instrument, right? This track behaves like soloing any other instrument. So if I were to solo the piano, my reverb is gone. Now it's still being sent here, but we're not hearing it. So in order to hear it, I would have to solo the reverb too. So generally when we're mixing and when we're working and we want to be able to solo, we want to hear that reverb because it's affecting our picture of the mix, right? And so there's a little trick, and it's called Solo Safe, right? And so what Solo Safe does, right, if you command click on the S, it's grayed out. Okay, that means that channel, it doesn't have a solo function anymore. It's always playing. So now if I play, right, I have reverb. Okay, you could accidentally do the same thing to a instrument track. So if you have your piano parts playing right? And you accidentally command click on this solo and it turns gray, that means even if you solo other instruments, you're still going to hear that piano because it's solo saved, right? So that's no solo save. So if I solo this piano, I only hear the chords. If I hit solo save, I don't have, it ignores all solos and it's always on. Right? Does that make sense? I see some confused looks. Hopefully this is, again, we can go back over this when we get to audio. But I do want you to know how to use a reverb. And the important thing about the reverb, first of all, don't solo save your instrument tracks unless you want to hear them all the time. And you need to solo save your reverb aux channels. So that way, when you solo an instrument, you hear the reverb. I'll close out all those windows. And I also want to talk about one other part of MIDI, which are MIDI channels. So every MIDI cable or every MIDI device has the ability to send on 16 channels. And these 16 channels, you can think of them like radio stations, right? You can have, you can be receiving on all different radio stations in your car. And so the way this works is if you have a keyboard and it's got a MIDI out cable, this cable has the ability to transmit on all of these different channels. So when you have a piano, you select. My piano here, it has a little button you hold down and then you hit a key. So I hold down the MIDI channel button and then I can hit a key, a note, and it will change from channel 1, channel 2, channel 3, channel 4, all the way up. So you decide what channel your keyboard is sending on. That channel then goes to a device that's set to that same channel. Right? So if I wanted to play, if I had 16 instruments set up and each one was set to a different MIDI channel, I could simply change my output channel here and switch between devices. So if I hit MIDI channel 1, it would go to this device. If I hit MIDI channel 3, it would go to this device. Right? So those are the MIDI channels. Now you can have multiple devices on the same channel. I could put all 16 of these devices to receive on channel 1, and then I could transmit on channel 1, and it would play all 16. Right? Is that clear? So it's you have 16 different paths in one cable, and you choose which path you want to send out, and then you choose on your device which channel you want to receive from. And then there's one other mode in MIDI that's called Omni mode. And Omni mode is kind of like a fail-safe. If you put your piano on Omni, no matter what channel it's coming in on, it's going to read it. So Omni means I read all channels. Okay? So we got your MIDI channels and your Omni mode. And on these channels, besides the notes that are being transmitted and the velocity and the duration, right? There's also other data that's being transmitted called CC data, continuous controller data. And this is, it's a format that you can manipulate yourself. So, for example, continuous controllers are usually things like you can control your MIDI volume. So if you had a slider on your piano, you could sign it to MIDI controller volume number 7, and that's the normal number, controller number for MIDI volume. And I'll show you this later when we start talking about MIDI volume. MIDI pan is number 10, and so on. And so besides all the note information, there's also all this other information that you can transmit over MIDI. And that goes back and it follows those channels. So if you're sending out MIDI volume on channel 1, it's only going to go to device 1, right? And the numbers are the same as velocity. So you have from 0 to 127, it's 128 increments, right? And so these 128 increments, if you hit a note very soft in velocity, then that's going to be maybe 20 or 30, right? If you put the volume all the way down with your MIDI volume knob on your keyboard, right, it's probably going to be 0. And then as you turn it up, you have this many increments, 128 increments of resolution. And that's the current MIDI spec. And that's what we're stuck with for today. But, there's new MIDI spec right around the corner, which will give us more resolution. Okay. So that's the boring slideshow stuff. So let's go back to our little song. So we have this piano piece, simple piano piece. Okay, just real basic piano piece, right? So we have a melody track and we have a chord track. And what we want to do is we want to take these two tracks and we want to make an arrangement, It's not going to be the Batman theme, but it'll be something, right? And so we have I've set up a little band here, okay? And if we look at our band, you can see that we have our piano. And I'm going to go ahead and rename these so it's easier to remember, right? So I'm going to call this melody. And I'm going to call the second piano chords. Okay, so we have our melody and our chords. And then we have a little orchestra here. So we've got a flute and an oboe. Those are our kind of melody instruments. We have strings. We have some bells, a tambourine. We have a steel string guitar. And we have an electric bass. So that's my band. Now I want to take this data, and because I'm not a great keyboard player, I want to be able to manipulate this data and turn it into an arrangement. So let's open the piano part in our MIDI editor. So I'm just going to click on this little waveform here on this clip. And then I'm going to select this arrow down here to open our MIDI editor. You can see that we have the chords here on the top. And we have a pretty well delineated bass line here on the bottom. So now listen. So we have our chords with our bass line, right? Now let's take a listen to the melody and take a look at the melody. And if you want to switch between the chords and the melody track, right, you can either come over here and you can click on these little gray dots, deselect one and select the other, right? Or you can also use the grabber tool and click on the track up in this arrange page, right? So now I can switch easily between these two tracks. There's also a shortcut for this. There's a key command, right? And this is an important one. This is one you'll probably use more than almost any other key command. And it's the P and the semicolon. So what that does when you're in the arrange window is when you press the semicolon, it takes whatever selection you have and it moves it down. So this makes it easy to copy and paste things in this window without going to the editor. So P goes up, semicolon goes down. So let's take a quick listen to our melody here. I'm just going to solo it, and I'll come over here to our little solo button since we had the melody here. So as we listen, we can tell that the melody is basically broken up into 2-bar phrases, right? We have a phrase, and then we have an answer. So basically the whole song is broken up into 2-bar phrases. I mean, you could also think of it as 1-bar phrases with a pickup if you wanted to, and that's one phrase. That's the second phrase, right? But to me, it feels like pretty much like 2-bar phrases. So understanding the phrase structure of the melody is very helpful in learning how to orchestrate the melody. So you guys are doing a simple project, which you may or may not want to put this type of thing into it because it's not required, but if you do it, more power to you. If you wanted to expand on this, understanding phrase structure would be helpful in creating your orchestrations. So let's take a look at this melody, and I'm just going to select part of it, and I'm going to do that by you can use any tool, and the ruler bar you can use any of the tools, and when you drag in the ruler bar, you can select. So the first thing that we talked about, when we were going through this, was we used our trimmer tool, and we put it in grid mode, and we snapped everything to the grid using the trimmer tool. And that was basically to teach you mouse techniques and to understand how the tool works. But last week we got started on quantizing. And so I wanted to show you a little more about the quantizing window. So I'm going to press the Option and the number 0. And that brings up the quantize window. Somebody asked me last week, I think it was maybe Jeremy, I don't remember who asked, one of you did. The key command is actually Option and hitting the 0 on the extended keyboard. But it also works here on this 0. So you don't have to have an extended keyboard to open up the quantize window. All right. And this window is called the Event Operations window. And there are lots of different sub-menus here, right, that do different things. And so what's an event? Every one of these notes is a MIDI event. So this is an event, and this is an event, and this is an event, right? So those are MIDI events. And this event operations window does different things to those events, right? Quantizing is about time, putting it in time. Changing velocity is changing the velocity, making it harder or softer, louder or softer, right? Changing the duration is changing the length of the notes. And you have all of these parameters for each one of these event operations. Transposing the notes is changing the pitch, right? And then we have selecting notes. You can split notes and select notes in different ways. And these tools are incredibly powerful. When you start working more in Pro Tools and you get these under your belt, you'll be able to work quickly. And then these other ones I don't use too much. Input quantize is a destructive quantize. So however you play it in, it's going to be that. It's going to correct it, and it's going to be perfect. Perfect doesn't mean musical. Perfect just means perfect on the grid, right? So I don't like input quantize. I don't like for the computer to decide what my music should sound like. So I would rather play it in somewhat sloppy and then quantize it myself using the quantize channel up here. And then this one is step input. I use this occasionally. You can just play a note on the keyboard and it will enter in the same as you're using the pencil tool to add a note. You can just play a note on the keyboard and it'll enter it in at whatever note increment you have. So we're going to kind of go through some of these. Restore performance I never have used, and flatten performance I never have used. Okay, so mainly the ones we'll be using are these first 5. So let's go back to our quantize window and let's take a look at what these different things do. Oh, I wanted to show you one other thing actually. We'll go back to our melody here. We were talking about events. So besides, if you clicked on a note here, let me get back to my grabber tool, right? That is an event, and there's an editor called an event list editor, MIDI event list, and it's here under the window configuration, right? And this is what my sequencer looked like when I first started working with computer sequencers. There was no graphical interface. I had these columns of data. And, if we have 960 ticks, in our little resolution up here in our counter, I would have to look down this list of data and I could see that this second note isn't 480, it's 456. So that's probably a little bit ahead of the beat, right? I can see that that's not on beat 3. That's a little bit ahead of the beat 2, right? So this is how I used to have to edit MIDI. It was all mathematical. It was all just like this, and we would still make some pretty cool music out of it. So these days I don't use this window very much, but I wanted to show you what it was. So this first column is your note start, where you hit the note. This is the pitch of the note, right? The second column here. This is the velocity, how hard you hit the note. This is the off velocity. And then this is how long the note lasts. So this first note lasts 1 beat and 510 ticks. Again, I don't really use this anymore. I haven't opened this in a long time. I just wanted to be thorough. So we'll get rid of this. And let's select our notes that we want to quantize. Right? So I'm going to just click on the screen here. I'm going to hit Command A to select all. And then let's take a look at our quantize window. So if we look at our track, our melody track, you can see that these notes are not quantized. I don't know how well you can see the grid on Zoom there, but you can clearly see that this note is ahead and this note is ahead of the grid, right? You can see that the durations go past the note here, right? So this melody actually sounds good, right? It doesn't need to be quantized. It's played in time. It has feel. It has emotions. It's human, right? But I'm trying to show you tools that you can use with, for different types of music, or ways to make these tools work for you. Okay. So we have up at the top here, we have note on and note off. And this is, what are you quantizing? Are you quantizing where the note happens, or are you quantizing how long the note holds? So this is like duration. Okay. So let's just do one at a time and I'll show you how it works. We'll turn off note off, right? And then the next thing we have to do is we have to set our grid resolution. So let's go back to our melody here. If we zoom out and look at our melody, we can see that, well, this is an 8th note here, right? If you look at our counter. So we have an eighth note, and then, over here's a couple of 16th notes, right? So what you want to do is you want to set your grid resolution to the fastest notes that you have in the song. So we have 16th notes in the song, so I'm going to set my resolution to 16th notes. If you left it on 8th notes and you quantized, it would put these two notes at the same time. These 16th notes would be happening on top of each other because there's nothing in between for it to quantize to. So we found 16th notes as our smallest resolution, and we're going to hit apply. Let me zoom in first so you can see. And you'll see when we hit apply, you'll see when we hit apply that these notes, the beginning of the notes, snap to the grid, right? And you know that if you have something selected, the light will be blue, or the apply button will be blue. So you'll know that it's active and you can apply to it. So when I hit apply, you'll see all those notes jump. And so now they're perfectly on the grid. Not musical, but perfect. Right? So that is how you set the note on. Now if we add note off, we'll undo that. If we add note off also, it's going to quantize the release of the notes too. Right? So we'll hit apply. And you can see that now the cutoffs are exactly on the bar also. So there's no overlap. This can be useful for certain types of sounds, like monophonic sounds that cut off, or that type of thing, or maybe loops, that you want to make sure that it's exactly in the right place. Okay, so that's that type of quantizing, just rigid quantizing. Okay, let's undo that. So as we move down the window here, we have our grid, and then underneath this we have tuplets. And the tuplets are how you would do triplets or quintuplets, septuplets. So a triplet is 3 16th notes in the time of 2. So that's what this little box means here. So a tuplet, 3 in the time of 2. That's a 16th note triplet. So apart from tuplets, there are things like offset. So with offset, if I selected, I can make the track sound later. For example, I want the track melody to sound laid back. And I set my offset to 10. It would quantize whatever I have selected here, but then it would put it 10 ticks later. So you can see that all of these notes are late now, right? So that's offset grid. Undo. All right, and then we have randomize, which maybe you would use that if you had a machine part, like a percussion part, and it was too rigid and you wanted to make it feel more human. You could add a little bit of random element in. I've never really used this too much, but it's there if you need it. And then you have swing, and swing is based on your quantized grid. So if you wanted to have a little bit of swing in your notes, you could kick this up a little bit, and that'll make your notes have a swing feel to them. Include and exclude within, we don't need to deal with that. This one is the crucial one, right? Strength. Okay, so we have this performance that we already like, right? But maybe it's just a little too sloppy. It's really good, but if it was just a little bit tighter, it'd be great. So that's where the strength command comes in. So if you take the strength and you set the strength down to maybe 85%, and now you hit quantize, it's going to quantize it 85% toward the grid marker. Right? So now when I hit quantize, you'll see that it moved, but it's really not on the bar line. So this is the most musical way to quantize, right? And 80, 85 is probably, usually I go more like 90, 94, something like that. So now when you're quantizing, you're not making it rigid. You still have a human element. You're still, you still have your flaws in your performance, but it's just moving it a percentage closer to the quantized grid. So that's quantize. I'm going to undo that for right now, and we're back to where we were. So now let's talk about our chord track sum. So you guys remember to switch between the track arrange page and the edit screen. You have to click on that gold box, right? So we're going to zoom in, or zoom out, I guess. And, we can see, as we said earlier, that the bass line is pretty separate from the chords. So it's going to be easy to take the bass line and split it and put it on another instrument. So there's several ways to do it, right? So if I just want to grab all these bass notes, the one way I can do it is I've got the grabber tool here. I can just draw a circle around the notes that I want. Right? So now I have these notes selected. I accidentally got an extra note selected. I didn't really want that note selected. So to deselect it, you just hold down the Shift key and you click it. So now I have my bass line selected. Right, that's one way to select it. So now that I have it selected, I can copy it, right? Command C. I can go up to my bass track up here. I'm going to use my selector tool here. I'm going to click right at the beginning, and oops, I'm on beat 2. I want to paste it on beat 1. So I'm going to hit return, take me back to the beginning. My selector's still on that bass track, and I'm going to hit paste. So now I have my bass line separate from my chords. When you have a track and you paste it, most of the time, like if I had this track here, and I copy it, and I paste it right below on the flute track, you'll see that the name didn't change. So my piano track, even though it's on the flute, is still called piano. So that's confusing when you're looking at clips, right? So instead of just pasting it, I'm going to undo. If you hit Option M, that's merge paste. And merge paste will take the name of the track and put it on the clip. Now there's one caveat to that. Now this is really good if there's nothing on the track here, right? But if I were to take this piano part, I were to copy it, I'm going to use my semicolon to move down. There we go. So I'm going to use my semicolon to move down. Now if I hit merge paste again while there's data on this track, it's actually going to merge the MIDI data. So now I've got the piano and the melody on the same track. So merge paste is good in some instances when you're working quickly and you want your names to be proper. But once you have data on the track, merge pasting is going to it's not going to overwrite that data, it's going to merge it. So you'll have both sets of data. So we had our bass track, we selected it and we pasted it, but we used regular paste. So what I'd like to do now is instead go back to our chords track. I'm going to show you some other ways to select them. Right? That if you look at your keyboard here on the side of the MIDI editor, you can find out where the highest note is of the bass line, right? And you can find out where the lowest note is. And these keys on the piano keyboard have numbers associated with them. So every octave is a different number. So this is C1, this is C2, this is C3. And all of the keys on the piano are numbered that way. And this is C0. There's a -1 and a -2. Okay? So we'll use those in a second. But if another way to select these notes besides lassoing is you can click on this keyboard and drag down, and that'll select the notes also. I got my one note that I didn't want again, so I'm going to shift click to get rid of it. I'm going to copy. Then I'm going to go to my bass track. I'm going to hit return to make sure I'm at measure 1, beat 1. And I'm going to option in M, merge paste it, and I'll have my name there. So that's the difference between merge and paste. All right, so we have two ways to select, right? Let's talk about one other way. And this is going to be with our MIDI operations window. So I'll go back to my chords track here. All right. So now if I hit option 0, that's going to bring up in my events operation window. And I'm going to go down to split notes, select/split notes. Okay. So in this section, we're going to take the bass notes out with a couple of different techniques so you know what this split window does. So first of all, we can just take the bottom one note of each chord. All right. Now, in order for this to work, you have to have all the notes selected. So I'm going to come back down to my track. I'm going to Command A to select all. And then I'm going to select bottom one note of each chord. And when I hit apply, I have all these notes selected. Well, it selected some extra notes because it thinks that this is a different chord for each one of these. So I can shift click and just get rid of the extra notes. So that's the third way to select the bass line. All right. You can do the opposite too. If you wanted to select the top notes of a chord, you can do that here. So you could just select the melody, the top note of a chord if you wanted to. Remember the other day when we were doing our chord voicings and we wanted the top note of the melody to be louder than the other notes, or the top note of the chord to be louder than the other notes, so it was voiced so you could hear the melody on top. Well, this is a way you could use the top one note of each chord and select all those notes, and then you could just use your same grabber tool, and you could bring the velocity down, Okay. And so that's the bottom notes of each chord. The other way to do it is to look at our gauge here, right, at our piano keyboard, and we find the highest note of the bass line, and we find the lowest note of the bass line. So the highest one is G1, and the lowest one is F0, right? F0. Okay, so we can select them that way also. So we'll just go to notes between. We'll type F0, and we'll tab to go to the next field, and we'll type in G1. Hit apply. Wait, you have to have everything selected before you do any operation. So we're going to select all, and I'm going to hit apply, and you'll see that it selects all those bass notes again, and there's the one note we don't want. We'll shift click to get rid of it. Okay, so we can copy that way. So, this is really important stuff here. I'm going to kind of go back through everything quickly here and make sure we're clear on all this. So let's start over with this session. I'm going to go back to revert to saved. Right. Okay, here we are again. Going back to the melody track. To expand this window and make it bigger, you can grab it and pull it there on this bar. You'll see it turns into a plus. You can resize. Take a look at our melody track. I'm going to select all. And then we're going to option 0. We're going to talk about note on and note off again. Right? So note on, we're going to set our quantize grid to 16th notes, which is the fastest notes we have. Right? We're going to hit apply, and when we do, you'll be able to see that these snap perfectly to the grid. That's the note on. Our durations didn't change, so however long that duration was, it's going to stay the same. So if you move the note later, the duration's actually going to hold longer because that whole note just moved. Undo. You can see the end of the note moves too. Right? That's because we have on preserve duration. If you turn that off, then only the front of the note will move. So that's more like when we're using our little trimmer tool to snap things in. It didn't affect the back of the note. So this is note on without preserve duration. And you'll see that only the front of the notes move. All right. So we talked about note off. And note off is going to quantize everything. So the front of the note and the back of the note will be quantized, and it'll be perfect timing. Not musical, just perfect. Okay. We talked about the 16th note grid, and we talked about tuplets and how you need, for a triplet, it's 3 in the time of 2. And we talked about the randomize and offset grid, swing, and the strength is the most crucial one, right? So we're going to apply this strength to, let's make it 94. And we'll just leave that on the melody. And I'm going to hit apply. And that's going to be better, but it's not perfect. It's still got some movement in it. And these grids, the way Pro Tools sets them up, they look the same everywhere to make it easier to find things. So you have a grid here, your grid selection here. You've got your grid selection here. It looks the same, You've got a grid selection here, right? And so that's just to make it easier to find things. Okay, so that's our quantizing window. We talked about these other features here. Velocity, duration, transpose, and split notes. And we're going to get into more of those now. Let's talk next about how to change the pitch of notes. Right? So let's say that we wanted to take these first 4 bars. I'm going to select them up here in the ruler. Right? And we wanted to change the pitch of those notes. Well, we can drag them. Right? But we can also use the up and down arrows. Right? If we want to go through the notes and hear them one by one, we can use the left and right arrows. So I could scroll to the next note by hitting the right arrow, the next note, the next note. And that way, you could make, you can make chords whatever you want. So if I'm on this first note and I hold down the Option key, right, it's going to duplicate that note. And then when I use my up arrows, I now have a cluster. Right? So I'm gonna hold down Option. I'm gonna hit one note, and then I can move that note up. Right? So that's how you can duplicate a note and make a chord. Hold down the Option key, arrow up one time, and now just use the arrow keys. Right? The other way to change the pitch of the note is to hold down the Shift key. And while you have the Shift key held down, you press the up arrow, and that will make it go up an octave. Up and down changes the octave of the notes. This is really useful for arranging. So let's talk about transpose. I'm going to select all. Okay. Then let's Option 0. Open my events. Actually, there's a shortcut key for that. Option T is for transpose. There's my airplanes again. So Option T brings up the transpose window. And there's many different ways to transpose, but we're going to just concentrate on this top part here. And the way this works is it's done in semitones, and semitones are basically half steps, right? So if I wanted to take this melody and I wanted to transpose it up a major third, okay, if I look at a keyboard, so from C to E, from C to E is a major third. So we have to count the half steps if we want to go up a major third. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 semitones. So we start on C. 1, 2, 3, 4 is a major third. Okay. So we're going to break it up 4 semitones. And make sure I have everything selected here. Get rid of this keyboard. And I'm going to hit apply, and you'll see that everything jumps up a major third, right? So that's your transpose window. So let's say that I wanted to duplicate this whole section, right? And I wanted to bring it all up a minor third the second time around. Okay, so first I can select all the notes using the lasso. And it's easier to start at the end and go backwards. Right? And this works in so many different Mac programs already, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, but Option Drag duplicates. So I'm just going to take this first note, I'm going to drag it, and I'm going to place it here. And now I have a duplicate of the melody that's, 9 bars later. And now I can transpose with my transpose window. And if I want to bring it up a minor third, that's 3 semitones. So I'll just click in 3, and I'll hit apply. And so now I have a modulation, right? Right? So that's an easy way to modulate your song. And you can do this across multiple tracks. I'll show you that in the arrange page in a minute. Now, another way to duplicate this besides dragging it is to select up here. Make sure you're in grid mode. Select on the ruler bar and Command D. Duplicates the data. So you just want to make sure that you're in the grid. So when you hit Command D, everything follows, right? And you're still in time. So now I have a duplicate. So that's transposing and quantizing, and I taught you all this stuff, the manual way to do things first, because I wanted you to have the mouse skills and I wanted you to know how to use all the tools. But now that you know the manual way, it's really important to start to learn all these keyboard shortcuts, because it's the only way to really be fast in Pro Tools. I could go up to my event window and I could scroll down to timer operations and I could scroll over to transpose. That takes a long time, but Option T, and it just pops right open. And with the transpose window and the quantize window, if you hit Option T again, it closes it. So you can just toggle it, open and close. Same with the quantize. So we want to make an arrangement, right? So what do we have so far? We didn't do our bass yet. Let's go back and get our bass. So I'm going to split this off from the chord tracks. I'm going to just drag down. I'm going to deselect this one note that I don't want, holding the Shift key and clicking. I'm going to copy these notes. I'm going to go to the bass track with my selector tool. Click on the track, and I'm going to hit return to bring me back to bar 1. And I'm going to Option M for merge paste. All right, so we have our bass track split off now. So we have our bass track. Let's make a guitar track next. So this is I'll close out our MIDI editor for right now. We'll talk about how to do things in the arrange page here. So in order to move this down to the guitar track, we can Option drag the piano down to the guitar track. Right. But it's named piano, right? When you're dragging things and you have the wrong name, there's a way to fix that also. You can select the track, and there's a command that's Option Shift 3. And that command is consolidate track, and it's up here in the edit menu, and it's consolidate clip, Option Shift 3. And that will rename your track, whatever you have. It will also, if you had a bunch of regions, if you had a bunch of, if these were all broken up, all these MIDI regions, and they were in all different clips, if you select all of these, right, and then you use that same command, consolidate clip, which is Shift Option 3, it will make your whole clip consolidated, so there'll be no more breaks. Okay, so that's one way to copy. All right, we can also copy and paste, so Command C, and then using our semicolon, since we have that region selected, we can move down and we can Option M, merge paste. And now we have our piano track on our guitar, and it's labeled properly steel string. So let's take a listen to this guitar track, and let's talk about what we can do to make it better. It doesn't really sound like a guitar. And does anybody know why? Any suggestions on how we can make this better? Make it sound more like a guitar? Anybody out there? Are you all in another room chilling out?
Maybe we could arpeggiate it a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So one way is to arpeggiate it, but the other way is if you play a guitar, you usually don't pluck all the notes at the same time, you know. With a guitar, it's usually a strum. So if you have a pick, you're strumming down the strings. So those are the two techniques that we can use to make it sound more like a guitar, since it's only a synth, right? There's one other problem with this track, and that is these notes are out of the range of the guitar, right? So that doesn't sound real. You're out of the sample range, and no guitar plays that low. So we're just going to delete those notes. And before we do any editing to the guitar, you can see it already sounds more like a guitar because we're in the right register for the instrument. So I sent you guys a sheet just for your own enjoyment in the class materials. Maybe I didn't send it. I'll have to find it. Okay, I'll find you that and send it to you. But it's a chart of all the instruments and their range, right? Their musical range, so you can know not to add notes below an instrument's range. Okay. So let's start editing this and see what we can do to make it a little more musical. All right. So I'm going to take my trim tool, and instead of grid mode, we're going to go into slip mode. And I'm going to zoom in so I can see better. And we're going to just take these notes and we're going to strum them. This note looks really loud. I'm going to hold down, go to my grabber tool. And I'm going to adjust the velocity by holding down Command and dragging down. Okay. So if we listen now, right, you can adjust them however you want to make them sound however you want and make them musical, spread them out a little more. You can make slow rolls or fast rolls, however you want. Right? So that's starting to feel a little more like a guitar. Okay, so maybe here we want to do something different. So let's make an arpeggio here. Broken arpeggio. And so I'm going to zoom back in. Find where we are. Yeah, here we are. I'm going to go back to grid mode. Right? And I'm going to break these notes up so they're easy to edit. So I'm in grid mode, I'm going to hit Command E. And that will split those notes, right? So now the chord is playing 4 times and we've got it in 1/8 notes. Okay, so we're going to make an arpeggio out of it, and let's do. Go back to grabber tool, and I'm going to grab some notes. Right, so now we have this, but that still doesn't sound like a guitar. Right? Because when a guitar plays chords and when they're arpeggiating, usually the strings are ringing underneath. So we're going to go back and we're going to grab our trim tool. And we're going to just drag these notes out. Right?
I have a question about this.
Sure.
So we haven't quite talked about this, but I know that aside from velocity, there are also parameters for the pedal. Would this be an appropriate use of that?
Yeah, you could use sustain pedal there also. Absolutely. This you've got a little more control over, but yeah, that's absolutely fine. Right now we're just working with the note data. But sustain pedal, if you're playing a piano, you could hold down the sustain pedal and sustain the guitar notes for sure. All right, and then we'll go ahead and we'll strum this. So by the way, I'm using my F keys that we had talked about also. So that's the reason how I'm getting to all these tools quickly. We have our different modes on F1 through 4. And then 5 through 10, we have our different tools. Right? So we're going to go back to slip mode, and we're going to use our trimmer tool, and we'll go ahead and just make a little more arpeggio going here. Right. And then maybe measure 4, we'll do a reverse arpeggio. So I'll go back and I'll grab my selector tool and I'll go back to grid mode. And I'm just going to divide these up again using Command E. Okay. So now we're going to do a reverse this time. We'll select our notes. Maybe. Mm. I don't know, something like that. I'm going to take my trim tool and I'm going to expand these back out some. Maybe this one, yeah, I don't know what this is going to sound like. We'll hear it and then we'll fix it if we don't like it. Right. Right, so that's, that's some different ways that you can humanize or make it sound more like the actual instrument that you're trying to synthesize, by just using these little editing tricks. So let's take a listen to this and let's put the bass in with it and listen for a second. Let's solo the bass too. We'll listen from the top. Okay, so there's a problem with that. Anybody know what the problem is? Yep, go ahead. Raphael?
The bass is very muddy.
Right. And why is it muddy? Because it's out of the range of the instrument again. Right? So we have the first few notes are okay, maybe, A 4-string bass goes down to an E, right? And a 5-string bass can go all the way down to a B, right? But this sounds, we have notes here that are below the register that we want to use. So I'm going to, from measure 4, I'm going to select the rest of the bass line. I'm going to use Shift and up arrow and quickly bring the rest of the bass line up an octave. So the rest of that sounds fine. That's all in the register of the bass, and it sounds pretty natural for what it is. And maybe this D here, maybe we're playing a 4-string bass, and maybe we want to bring that D up an octave too. And so we'll have a little octave displacement. You'll hear the bass line walking down and then jumping up an octave. And that's another way to make bass lines more interesting is by switching octaves in the middle of a line like that. So what else can we do to this? To me, this is a boring song, right? It's too slow, right? So let's try to change the tempo and see if it helps. So right now we're at 72. Let's just kick it way up there and see what happens. Let's go 92. All right. So I did that by clicking on this little arrow. Make sure you're at the beginning of the song, right? Then you're going to click on this little plus, and this dialog box comes up where you can change the tempo. Right. So let's listen to it at 92. And see what happens. Yeah, that's too fast. That sounds horrible. So let's try another tempo. So we'll go back to our measure 1. You can see we're at measure 1 here. Click on the plus. And let's make it 80. Okay, to me, the bass is too loud. I'm going to bring it down some. Okay, so that first half sounds pretty good, right? It's not too bad. It's better than what we had. So let's go ahead. We're going to finish the guitar part quickly, just so we can have a finished product here. right? So we'll do our, maybe we'll do a little arpeggio here. We're going to split our notes again. We're going to use our selector tool, and we're going to make sure we're in grid mode. And we're going to split it into eighth notes. Right? So that command is Command E, but there's a single keystroke command also that's much easier to use, which is just pressing the B. So you put your cursor where you want it to separate, and you hit the B, right? And then we have the notes separated. So now we can make, let's make a different arpeggio here. Just break it up some.
I have one question about that.
Sure.
Is there a way to only break one of those lines?
Ooh, yeah, that's a good question, isn't it? Let me think about that. Not really. We're separating at a. Well, I'll show you another solution for that. Right. What you could do is you can heal some of these things. Right. So so if you have them broken, you can select with your grabber tool. Right, and you could heal those divisions. Yeah. So the command to heal is Option Shift 3. It's that same command that we consolidated notes with, right? So you can heal your separations.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Right? Okay, so we continue with our arpeggio here. So we'll do a 1, 3, 5 kind of thing here. Maybe we'll just let this one ring. So I'm assuming you guys know all the tools that I'm using by now. I've said it 10,000 times, but if you don't, ask. So here we are. We'll do this. All right. Make a little roll here. I'm going to go back to slip mode. I'm just going to roll this a bit. I'll zoom in so I can see. And then, okay, and we'll go back to our regular arpeggio. We'll extend our notes back out. Right, and then let's do something different here. Let's grab our separating tool again. We'll use our selector, and we're going to go ahead and separate these. And let's say right here we wanted to do a rhythm pattern. So maybe we want to bum, 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 that type of thing, right? So that's real easy to do. We can just grab these notes and delete these. And then we can just grab these 3 notes. And here's another thing. You can select 3 notes, right? Those notes are all one chord. And I can use my trim tool, and I can drag them all at one time. Right. Let's go back to our slip mode. We'll go back to our trim tool. We'll make our little guitar rolls here. But not maybe so long this time since we're playing a rhythm pattern. Just so they have a little guitar type of feel. Something like that. Let's just go ahead and roll these out. And again, you adjust these rolls however you want them to sound musically. You're the arranger, you're the guitar player. Make it happen to your own taste. Maybe we want to roll this last chord a little longer, make it more dramatic. And let's see what we got here. Okay, that's starting to sound much better, much more like a guitar anyway. So there's one other thing I can do. I can, if we go here to the end here, I can bring out some notes, right? I can make a little line, and I can do that by changing the inversion. Okay, so I'm going to select the notes with my grabber tool, or maybe we take these two notes instead. Let's try this. Let's see what that does. Okay, that's better. But check it out. Now our strum is wrong because we have moved the bass note to the top. And now the top part of the strum, it's not strumming anymore. So I'm going to go through and I'll just go back to my slip mode and I'll correct this, and make my strum happen again. And then we just brought out a little line to make some interest in the guitar part. Right? Any questions on that? Anybody want me to go over anything? I'm kind of just flying through this stuff here. And let me know. Just jump in there, guys, if you want me to repeat anything. I certainly don't mind going back over stuff.
I have a question.
Sure.
It's not about what we did today. It was more about last class, but I don't know if this is a good time to ask.
Sure, go ahead.
I just forgot. We were talking about the drum track, and which one did you use? Can you show me that again? It was from last class. Sorry.
Yeah, it's Expand. I'm using the Expand plugin, right? And so you can, and I'll make another Expand here so we don't mess up our instrument. I'm just option dragging, right? And so you can go here and look under your presets. I'm sorry, underneath the presets is this little line here. And you can scroll all the way up and you can find the drums. Number 26 is the drums. And then there's a million drum kits here, right? So if you take like, I don't know, Pop Kit or something like that. And what I was saying during class was that, that the notes, they follow the keyboard. So if you have this sound and you play a C, why is it working? I think because I have two plugins here. So this see, I confused it by putting two plugins here, so it messed up my MIDI routing. Right? So there's an extra expand on there now on the same track. Okay. So I can select this. Right? So if you play a C on your keyboard, right, that's a kick drum, and that's a snare drum. That's a different snare, and then we have toms going up here. And we have hi-hats here, and we have more toms here, and then we have cymbals, right? So that's on the Pop Kit. If we go to another kit, like, let's go to our rock kit now, you'll see that those same notes are mapped, right? So the C is still a kick drum, D is still a snare, but they're different sounds, right? We got hard sounding toms now, right? So that's a rock kit. So the point of that is if you program with one kit, you can program a beat and then you can just change patches and the same beat will play, it'll just have different sounds.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So let's fix this. So this happens sometimes, right? So I have this Expand plugin here, and I'm not hearing anything, right? And that's that MIDI output. So you have to make sure the MIDI output is going to the right place. So this is steel string, and I'm going to put it, and you'll see that there's different channels here. We haven't gotten into that yet. But for right now, all the patches you'll be using with Expand are on MIDI channel 1. So this device has 4 channels. So if we look at our MIDI output, right, you can see that on the steel string track, we have 4 MIDI channels here, right? So that's a multi-timbral device. It can play 4 different MIDI channels, receive 4 different MIDI channels at one time. And we'll get into this stuff a little bit later. Right now, just put your thing on channel 1 and use the sounds that the patches are there. But we can also customize things, and I'll go into expand a little bit more, but for this assignment, we don't need to get too deep. It's too much information right now. Right? So now we have our guitar back. Right? So did that answer your question, Anastasia?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Okay. Okay, so we finished our guitar part. So now let's take a listen to our strings. Right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this window down. I'll move this out of the way. And so I'm going to take our piano chord track, right? And I thought I renamed it. I guess I went back to my saved version. I reverted. So this is melody. And this is chords. So we're going to take this piano track and we're going to put it on the strings track, right? And we're going to take a listen to that. So I'm going to copy. I'm going to click on this region. There's a couple of different ways to select this clip, right? You see that, for one thing, let me show you something real quick because I just made a mistake and I want you to see it, right? You see that hand tool has a little scissors in it, right? That means that I'm not on the top level of my editing tools. So I need to go back, and that's on separation, right? So I want to be in regular time selection. And the same thing with this trimmer tool. You know, if you're in time expansion mode, the tool changes and it looks like that. Okay, so you want to make sure you're on this top level. So there's a couple of different ways to select this clip. One is just use your grabber tool and click on it. And that selects it. Or you can also use your selector tool here and you can double click on it and that'll select it too. So I want to move this down. So we talked about different ways to do it. I can option drag it and rename it. I can copy it, I can paste it, and that'll have the wrong name. Or I can copy it and I can merge paste so it has the right name. Right? So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to copy this clip, Command C, and then I'm going to go down with my semicolon. And I'll go to the strings track, and I'm going to hit Option M for merge. So now I have my strings on my strings track named properly. So let's take a listen to the strings and see what we can do to those. All right, they already sound a lot better than the guitar did. You know, it's a little better sample. The strings are a little better sample. But I think we can make it even better. If we take a look at this track, I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to open it in the MIDI editor. All right. I'm going to use my cool command that you guys showed me last week. And now we have our string track. And one of the reasons it sounds better is because it's a string patch. And an upright bass is voiced an octave lower than an electric bass. So those notes actually exist in an orchestra, all these low notes here. So it doesn't sound artificial, like the guitar can't play really low notes like that, right? So it sounds better. But, if we listen to it with the bass, it's a little muddy, and we don't need. So I think maybe the choice is first of all, it's loud, it's heavy. this is a delicate song, so we want to try to make it fit the music better. We're telling our story here, right? So I'm going to grab my grabber tool. I'm just going to lasso those notes, and I'm going to hit delete. Okay. So let's take these strings and let's turn them down. And let's listen with everybody and see what we have now. Oops. By the way, if you have a couple of tracks soloed and maybe there's one off the screen, you know, and so you unsolo these tracks and, oh no, something's still soloed. You can clear all of the solos, right, by using that same option command. So if you option click on a solo with something soloed, it clears all the solos. And if you option click when nothing's soloed, it makes them all soloed, right? So option is whatever you're doing, it does it to everything, right? So again, if I had something, one track soloed down here and I didn't see it, but I'm still hearing it, instead of scrolling down, you can just option click on the solo and that clears out all the solos, right? It's a little quick way to work. So let's see here. So we want to make an arrangement out of this, right? Right now it's wall to wall. You know, it's just big old fat string chords. So maybe what we'll do is let's take a listen with the guitar and everybody. So it's, you know, it's not any variation. It's just strings playing footballs, right? So how about we, let's delete the first 4 bars and bring the strings in later and see how that feels. And let's take a listen. Okay, so they're hitting too hard. I'll turn them down some more. Right? So now we're getting more of an arrangement. We have an opening section where the guitar is really featured more. And then we have a section where the strings come in and build the arrangement. Right? And it's not only building dynamically, it's building the arrangement with instrumentation. So let's think, what else can we do here? So let's take a look at these chords, right? So these chords, let's get rid of this one too, right? So right here is a little notation button. And this just brings up a real basic notation editor. So if I click on it, it turns into music. Okay. So if we look at these chords, how would you describe them? Anybody want to describe these chords? No? All right, well, how many notes are they? All right, they're triads. There's 3 notes, so they're triads. And are the triads in a closed inversion or an open inversion? Does anyone know what those terms mean?
Are they all closed?
Right. So what we have is this is a C chord, right? And we're starting on the 3rd. So we have an E, G, and a C. And there's no other notes of the chord that can fit in between those. So even though it's an inversion, it's a closed inversion, right? And so we're going up these chords, and they're all closed inversions, and that has a very tight type of sound to it. So if we wanted to make this an open inversion, it's really easy to do, and it's easier. It's hard to edit in this editor. So we'll go back to our piano scroll editor. So all you have to do is you take the middle notes of the chords, and I'm going to just select them. I'm holding down the Shift key, and I'm clicking on all the middle notes. Right? And then I'm going to bring those up an octave. And so now listen to what we have. All right, so that's a much more open sound. It's not so cluttered, so you can see the chords now. You know, they're an open voicing. So let's get out of this. So that's cool, but you know, maybe we want to have some change. So let's do this. Let's just take and let's just bring up the last maybe 4 notes. So we'll keep the first part in closed. And then we'll bring up these. Let's see how that does. So I'm holding down Shift and up arrow. So now we have this. Actually, let's bring this one up too. So now we have a line moving on top, so we're going from this closed sound to an open sound, and it'll bring out that line. All right, so we're getting more of an arrangement now. We've gone from this clunky sounding, all mundane track to some guitar that's got some movement. We have some voicings changing in the strings, right? There's one other thing that you can do that really helps MIDI strings. It's not true with real strings, but with MIDI strings, one of the things that makes them sound fake is the way the attack happens in the release when you go from one note to the next. So what you can do is you can select any common tones, right? So a common tone between this chord and this chord is this C, right? Common tone between this chord and this chord is this F. So these are all common tones because they go through the chord changes and it's the same note. So if we take those common tones, right, and we use that command we talked about before, Option Shift 3, we can heal all those common tones, and we can make them hold as we do the chord changes. So I'm just going to go through and I'm going to find any common tones, and I'm going to heal them. Oops. There we go. Is that all of them? Yeah. So now we listen and it sounds much smoother. You know, you don't hear the detach because you have these notes hanging over. It fools the ear a little bit and it makes it sound a little more realistic. Alrighty. Everybody good with all that? Any questions? Alrighty. So we have our strings, we have our guitar, and now let's get some melody going. So I'm going to take this piano part and using the techniques we talked about, I'm going to copy this piano melody. Copy. I'm going to use my semicolon. I'm going to move down to the flute. I'm going to merge paste. Option M. I'm going to move down to the oboe, and I'm going to Option M also. Okay. So now we have the melody on both tracks. So, I don't want the flute and oboe. Let's play them and take a listen here. The sounds aren't particularly good and expand, and there's some great orchestra sounds out there now, and I encourage you guys, there's actually some free libraries too that are really good, and I'll do a little research and maybe get you some. But for this class, I'm trying to keep everybody on the same page and use the same examples so they can, so you can work through this stuff. So let's take a listen to the flute. Let's turn it down. Okay, so that flute doesn't sound very good in that register, right? It sounds pretty fake. So let's see what the oboe sounds like. And I'm using my arranging also based on what my sounds sound like, right? So in that register, the flute sounds awful. So let's see what the oboe sounds like. It's too loud. But it's better, right? It's a better sound in that register. So, sometimes when I'm putting this melody together, I don't want the flute and oboe to be playing together the whole time. That'd just be boring, right? And so part of, we listened to the Batman theme today. Man, that one motif, it's played on every instrument in the orchestra, and it's jumping down as background parts, and it's, so there's all this change that goes on that keeps your interest in the arrangement. So let's these are your musical choices. There's not a right and wrong how you're going to do this. It's just, your musical taste and how you want to approach it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the flute track and stand by here. Let me find my spot here. Okay, so I'm going to just go through on the flute track, and I'm going to delete the first couple of bars on the flute. And so now we have the oboe playing the melody. All right. And so maybe the second phrase, I'd like to bring the flute in. All right, so let's take a listen to that. So it still sounds pretty clunky in that register. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it up an octave, right? But I'm going to show you a little trick here. Instead of going down to our editor down here, right? Let's close this out. I'm going to do some manipulation in this window, all right? So I'm going to select these flute notes that I want to bring up, like this. I'll make it bigger so you can see. So these are the notes I want to grab, right? So I'll go into slip mode so it's easier to grab exactly what I want. And I'm just going to drag across these notes. And then I'm going to hit Option T and bring up the transpose window. And I'm going to bring it up one octave. And get rid of this because that's left over. So I'm bringing it up one octave. Boom. You don't even have to go to the other window to do these simple type of edits. And so this can be very quick when you're writing. You can record. You don't have to go into the edit window, and you can make these basic changes quickly. Right? Everybody got that, right? So I'm making, I can quantize. I can do a lot of different commands from right here in the arrange window. So now we've got the oboe and flute playing together in an octave apart. So maybe the third phrase, I'm just going to have the flute play. So I'm just going to come here, I'm going to select the oboe, and I'm going to hit delete. Okay, wow, so that's too low too, right? So let's select this. And let's bring that up an octave too. Okay. And let's see what we got so far here. I'm going to put all the instruments in and let's take a listen. So we could try to grab this last phrase of the flute, and let's bring that up an octave and see what it sounds like. Okay, so what do? We made it into a piccolo, right? So we're out of the range of the instrument. So I don't like that. I'm going to bring it back down. Okay, so that's how we can take just a basic melody track and break it up among the instruments and edit it quickly and have more of an arrangement. So there's other ways to make the track more interesting and more musical. We're running out of time, aren't we? Yeah. So if I open my flute track, or let's do the oboe. Let's open the oboe track in the editor. Right? I'm going to make this big so we can see. If you look down here, there is a little triangle, right, that faces to the right. And if you click on that little triangle, you'll open up what's called the edit lanes. And you can make these bigger and smaller by just dragging that bar there. Right? You see it turns into a plus when you hover over that black bar. You can drag it up and make it bigger. And right now I have 2 lanes open, but I don't really want 2 lanes open, so I'm just going to click on this minus sign and get rid of one of them, and then I can resize this however I want. And if I want to add a new lane, I can always just click the plus again and get a new lane. So you can see multiple types of data at one time. So right now we're looking at our velocity, right? And if we select the whole oboe track, I can come up here, click on the ruler, Command A to select all, right? And if I grab one of these notes with all of them selected, I can turn down all. Let's hear it too. What did I do here? Oh, I got the flute soloed. Okay, apparently that option solo thing doesn't work in the if you use these buttons down here. So anyway, I have all the notes selected. Now if I want to bring down the velocity of all of those notes together, I can. Right? So these are your velocity. I think they're called, Pro Tools calls them stalks, like a stalk of corn, right? So you can grab these little data indicators by the dot and change the velocity of the whole track. Or you can just select one note, or a couple of notes and change velocity of 2 notes, or you can just grab one of them and pull them up and down. And so that's a faster way to change your velocity, and it also gives you a visual representation, so you can tell if maybe one note, if I had one note that was really soft, you'd be able to see it. Like if I grab my trimmer tool and I pull down the velocity on that one note, you can see that that's way too soft visually. So it's a nice way to work on velocity. Right. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring this velocity down a little bit because this sound is pretty harsh. And I think if I bring the velocity down, it might be a little mellower. And it's not quite so in your face and hard sounding, right? Okay. So that's the velocity editor. But what I really wanted to talk about is these type of instruments don't really ever stay steady and have a tone that is just straight. And that's one of the things that makes it sound so artificial, right? The instruments are just nee, nee, and that's not the way a musician plays, you know. If you listen to a skilled player and they're playing, you know, flute, they add expression to their instrument. And, you know, a flute player, maybe they're going to start a note soft, and then as the note goes, they're going to put more pressure and they're going to make the note louder. And then maybe by the tail of a long note, it's going to be getting softer again, you know. So they're making a shape with their performance, with their playing abilities. And the same thing with a violinist. You know, if a violinist plays a note, he might start the note with his hand still. And then as he's playing the note, maybe he adds some vibrato, right? And this is animating the note. And then maybe by the end, he goes back to still. So maybe, you know, a couple of seconds of still note and a couple of seconds of vibrato. And maybe the timing of the vibrato is changing, whatever he's doing to make that instrument more animated, right? So we want to try to emulate some of those things, whatever we can, with these samples that we have, right? So I could try to add vibrato to this, but the sample is so bad it just sounds horrible. It doesn't, you know, with a good sample, you could actually add vibrato with this by using something called modulation. But right now, what we can do is we can use MIDI volume, right? And MIDI volume is one of those continuous controllers we were talking about, okay? So that means that there's 127 steps of resolution in this MIDI volume. And right now, let's get it fairly balanced here before we do this. Right. So now let's go back to our oboe, and let's draw in some MIDI volume rides that are going to help make it more musical. Right. So I'm going to expand this out so we can see better. And I have two lanes open here. I didn't mean to do that. What I meant to do was select here and go to MIDI volume. And we only need one lane open at a time. Okay, so we have our phrase here. And so let's make it more musical. So I'm going to go to my pencil tool. And I'm going to hold down on the pencil tool, mainly because my mouse is not very accurate and it's hard to draw a freehand. So I'm going to just grab the straight line pencil tool. And I'm just going to swell these notes and make them feel however more musical I can, you know. So maybe the first note I'm going to have swelling in, you know. And then also when you draw these things, it's easier to draw from the end toward the beginning than it is to draw the other way. If I draw from the end, like if I take this note and I want to swell it in, if I draw from the end to the beginning, I can do that, right? If I try to do that the other way, then I've lost my volume level that I'm at. So right now my volume level is whatever it is here. If I draw from this way, well, I don't know, you know, I don't know where I was, especially if you're in the middle and you draw down and then you draw back up. Well, now I'm at a totally different volume level, right? So when you're drawing these things, if you start from the end of your ride, this is an automation ride, right? So we're automating the volume. We're letting the computer do the work here. So maybe we'll have the first note swell in, right? And maybe we'll have this note come down some, but let's do it the other way. So we want this note to swell in too. So maybe we'll put a little dip here, and we'll draw down, and maybe something like this, you know. And you can play with these, you know. Once you draw it, if you don't like it, you just redraw it. Right? I don't like that because I don't like the way that note cuts out. So let's undo that. And let's do something more like this. Not make it so deep. Or maybe we can do this. You can even make, just draw it in however you can make it feel musical. I don't like any of that. Let's get rid of that. So, but we do want to bring down this last note here, right? So if I click here and come down, okay, so I'll fade this note down some. And then maybe I'll have this next note fading in. I'm kind of overdoing this just so you can see it. Okay, so we're going to fade these two notes down here. Right? And so this makes it feel more realistic. Right? So now pretend like this is great. What we did is our perfect automation, and it's all amazing. What we can do now is we can take this automation and I can select it with my, sorry, I went to the wrong ruler. Select it with my selector tool. And the flute comes in on what, measure 3? So I can start from measure 3 and I can grab this data and I can copy it. And then I can go to my, actually it's better to do it in grid mode, right? So you have an exact number of where you're starting and stopping. So I can grab this automation and I can copy it, and then I can go to my flute track. Oops. Yeah. And then it doesn't look like it's selected anymore, but if you look up in the ruler bar, that thing is still there, that selection is still there. So you can move that selection down by using your semicolon again. Right? And I don't want to move it there because that's replacing notes. I want to click it twice and move it down to just the automation. And now I can hit paste. And so now my flute has the same ride as my oboe. Right? So, I mean, these are just some basic techniques that if you can use them on your project, great. I don't expect you to do a ton of MIDI volume work, but if you feel like it'll make your project more musical and you can use these techniques, please jump in there and use them, And so if you turned in something like this as a, this simple piece and it was 2 minutes long as a graduate student, this would be an A project because you've used all my tools. You've done what I wanted. You've used orchestration techniques. You've used all these different things. Right? I mean, that's a lot of data, guys. I'm sorry, that was like 3 hours worth of straight nerd talk. So let me know if you have any questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so what we were talking about today, this is primarily for our second project, correct? Or
no, you can use this stuff. I'm just giving you knowledge. I'm just giving. It's okay. Yeah, I'm just giving you knowledge, right? So if you want to use it, you're not required to use this stuff that I told you today. But any of it that you do use, you're expanding your abilities as an arranger and as an editor, right?
Okay, got it. Sorry, someone else in my house thought I was talking to them.
Oh, no problem. No problem. That's the reason I lock all my doors before I start this class. So very good, guys. That's all I've got for today. Thank you for bearing with me on all that. And I'll try to put up this video as soon as possible. So if you have any questions, you can go back through stuff. But other than that, have a great week, guys.